on the call already, I might kick us off. We've got a little bit of housekeeping to cover off before we jump into our panel discussion anyway, so everyone that is joining can hopefully join for that. But good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today for today's webinar on social value. My name is Anna Mitchell. I'm the Director of Communications and Stakeholder Engagement for WSP here in Melbourne. And it's my pleasure to be your moderator for today's session. So I'm joined this afternoon by a panel of experts, including Ainsley Simpson, Jackie Saltree, and Lucy Gregg, who I'll have the pleasure of introducing to you very shortly, more formally. And unfortunately, Shani Jones from the Department of Planning and Environment, who was scheduled to join us today, is unfortunately unwell and has passed on her apologies and isn't able to join us today. So hopefully we, as the panel, can answer any of those questions that you had for Shani. I'd like to start, first of all, by acknowledging that every project that we work on takes place on First Peoples lands, and I recognise and pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people as the first scientists and engineers, and pay our respects to their elders past and present. I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, on whose land I'm moderating this session from today, and acknowledge their continuing connection to culture, community, land, sea and sky. And I'd like to acknowledge the lands on where you're all dialing in from today. We've got a range of different people from all over Australia, so welcome to you all. I'm going to start us off with some housekeeping before we get stuck into things. So today's webinar is an interactive discussion with our panellists on that social value through infrastructure and the built environment. Thank you to those who have already submitted some questions through your registration page. We'll get to those at the end of the back end of today's session. But if you do have any questions that come to mind as we're going through our conversation today, please feel free to use the Q&A function in the bottom of your screen and type in as many questions as you like there, and we will do our very best to get to those at the Q&A session also. And then at the end of the session today, we'll be sending a recording of the session, as well as a copy of the social value report, which we're going to talk to you about shortly. Okay, before I introduce our panel, I wanted to touch on why social value is an important area for discussion. There's a lot of definitions of social value out there, but all of these definitions of social value highlight the importance of being able to measure and quantify social outcomes, and to establish an evidence base and to effectively demonstrate the benefits of the work an organisation is undertaking or is planning to undertake. So, in other words, to create social value, we need to prioritise good social outcomes. So the built environment and infrastructure sectors are quickly recognising the need to incorporate broader measurements of success into their projects, their portfolios and their strategies. But the question is, how do we define these ideas? What does success look like? And how do we measure the progress? So we tested those questions a little earlier this year when WSP partnered with the Infrastructure Sustainability Council to explore a range of perspectives on social value, which allowed us to really better understand its important role in delivering wellbeing for communities. And we've published that insights paper. We're going to share some of that with you. We're going to share that with you at the end of today's session. But a number of themes that were identified are themes that we're going to explore a little bit further today. Before we start today's session, I'd like to launch one of our polls. I always like to do a little bit of a pulse check to help me understand who is online. So we've got a poll today to help us understand the barriers that you're experiencing in this space. And so we have a quick poll that we're just going to pop up on the screen, and you can select up to 3 responses. So the first poll that we're going to take with you today, what are some of the key barriers or the key barriers to your organisation in implementing social values? So you can pick up to three of those, and we're just going to see what our results show us. Great. Wow, things are jumping around. I think there's a clear front runner there at the moment, still up the top. So the key barrier, it appears to be the lack of framework or process. That seems to be the top, and the difficulty in measuring success, both rating quite highly there. So that's interesting, not surprising, but again, very similar to what we've been hearing through our previous work in this space, is that lack of framework or process, and particularly also the measurement and how we measure that. Fantastic. Yep, that's exactly how we expected that one to go. So lack of process and framework and difficult to measure success. That's great. Thank you very much for your insights there, everyone. All right, so this is a good place, now that we understand that, a good place to stop and introduce our experts on the panel. So joining us today is Ainsley Simpson. Ainsley is the Chief Executive Officer of the Infrastructure Sustainability Council, and Ainsley is a leader in sustainability and fosters partnerships to advance sustainability, enabling industry to deliver infrastructure for our communities. We're also joined with Jackie Saltree. Jackie is the Regional Social Impact Manager for Victoria at Lendlease. That's a mouthful. Thanks, Jackie. And Jackie has a very, very important role. Is responsible for social impact initiatives and outcomes from bid stage to implementation, so right through the process. And Jackie has more than 20 years experience in the property and construction industry, so makes her a very, very valuable speaker today. Thanks for joining us, Jackie. And last but not least, we have Lucy Gregg. Lucy's the National Executive for Social Strategy and Outcomes at WSP. And Lucy is a researcher with expertise in the design and conduct of quantitative and qualitative research and studies relating to people and communities, with a focus on infrastructure, the built environment, and social policy. Thank you very much for joining us, ladies. And see, all ladies too, I like that. So before we kick off our questions that have come in, I have some questions that I would like to pose to the panel. And just a reminder, we've got the chat function in the bottom of your screens for anyone who'd like to pose some additional questions. So let's kick off, and I'm going to start by setting a small challenge for our panelists today. So I want to challenge each of you in 2 sentences, just 2, to explain why our people listening on this call today should care about implementing social value in their projects and in their organisational strategies. So let's start with Ainsley. Ainsley, the challenge to you in 2 sentences. Why do you think our listeners on this webinar should care about implementing social value on their projects and within their strategies?
Thank you, Anna, and greetings from Gadigal country today. I'm joining you from Sydney. So my 2 sentences would be this. The purpose of infrastructure is to enable people to thrive. And infrastructure is delivered by people, for people, with people.
Great. I think you went over 2 sentences there, but we'll put some commas in there for you. Ainsley, that's really good. Enabling people to thrive. I love that. Jackie, what's your 2 sentences?
Yes, 2 sentences is really hard to talk in this space, but let's give it a go. So for us at Lendlease, it aligns with our purpose and our values, and we know it's the right thing to do. It's our social license to operate. We need to build trust with the community, work with the community, and do the right thing by the community. It's our competitive advantage. Doing good equals good business.
Great. Doing good equals good business. I love that. You narrowed that one right down. And Lucy, what are your 2 sentences? How would you describe the challenge?
Thanks very much, Anna, and I'm joining you from Gadigal land here as well. Look, I think it's the right thing to do, and why not? Why not think about social value in the work that we're doing? We're all people, and we're all here to do the best that we can in communities and create the best outcomes from the projects and programs that we're working on.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. Thanks very much. Great stuff. Okay, I'm going to jump into some questions for our panelists, and then I'm going to go to the questions that we've received and pull some questions out of our chat also. So this question here, first part of this question, I'm going to direct this one to Ainsley, and then it's a 2-parter. So I'll get Ainsley, if you don't mind, to answer our first part of the question, and Lucy, I'll get you to jump in on the second part there. So, talking about the federal budget and the clear shift of language when talking about social value. So, all levels of government, we've all seen it, are increasing their focus on social value. The recent release of the Commonwealth's Measuring What Matters statement is an important milestone in the conversation to a better future. But how does this shift in language assist with accelerating social value in the infrastructure industry? Ainsley, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, the first thing is that it shows a shift in local policy to a national priority, and that's a really valuable shift. Then I think the next thing, which is quite important, is it brings to the fore the importance of starting early. Social outcomes cannot be retrofitted, and defining what is valued is done best when the beneficiaries are at the table. And the beneficiaries of infrastructure may well be the end users, or it could be the community and the custodians on the land on which that infrastructure is being developed. So I think when we think about that, it's important to have the right people at the table as early as possible, because those are the people that actually define what value is. Now, while not all jurisdictions are following a coordinated approach, we have seen in Western Australia through Main Roads WA, who are sustainability pioneers, and alongside OMTID and Westport more recently, who early adopters, that the IS planning rating is actually delivering some of those outcomes by starting with the end in mind. And I'd like to share a very specific example which demonstrates what's possible when social value is defined early and then required contractually consistently through procurement approaches. So in 2023, the Southwest Gateway Alliance won the Excellence in Social Outcomes Award from the Infrastructure Sustainability Council for their program linked to the Bunbury Outer Ring Road. It's a project that is based in Southwest WA, and it is a region that is characterized by really high unemployment. The Yaka Yanju program is dedicated to establishing meaningful career pathways for unemployed and job transitioning individuals. It's got a very special focus on youth, on women, and individuals over 45, as well as Aboriginal people. Now, this was the value stakeholders defined really early on. It was about creating individual opportunity and regional economic growth. The program includes mentorship, training, and preparatory modules for the workforce. It also aims to empower participants to contribute to major infrastructure projects in Western Australia, not just for that particular project. Since its inception, which was several years ago now, in October 2021, that program has graduated 140 participants. 60% of those graduates have been female, and 60% of the graduates were also Aboriginal people. And I think that's a really great example of how starting early and understanding what value is can be rolled out in partnership with government, communities, and the private sector.
Fantastic. Great response, Ainsley. Thank you very much. Lucy, a question for you. What do you think, or what are you seeing trend-wise with our clients, with WSP clients and other clients that you're working with? What incentives are needed to encourage our industry to prioritise social value? I mean, hearing the outcomes that Ainsley has talked about, how do we incentivise organisations to sort of manage those competing demands?
Look, I think that's an incredible initiative that Ainsley's talked about there, and great to be able to demonstrate the outcomes of something, given that it's been going for several years now. I think coming back to that idea of competing demands, our clients have a lot to think about in terms of the way that they're operating. So thinking about how to future-proof their portfolios, how to manage finite resources, how to manage complex challenges, how to navigate across political and social contexts as they deliver, infrastructure policies, programs, and more. So it's hardly surprising that social value isn't always, the first thing that comes to mind when you think about business as usual. It's there are many, many competing demands, and social value can seem like a nice to have rather than something that is intrinsically important. So I think we've seen, unless there's a mandate, and Ainsley's talked about the IS rating scheme, which is a really great tool that industry can and is using to great effect. But unless there's a mandate for elements like social procurement, the reconciliation initiatives that we've seen under reconciliation action plans and other programs, workplace gender equity initiatives, we know that change can be really slow, and we also know that it can be inconsistent. So I think the only way that social value will really move up the list and become a higher and more widely regarded priority in our organisations is through making delivery a requirement where that's possible, and by building a culture of social value. So really changing our mindsets towards thinking about this, bringing it to front of mind when we're, again, as Ainsley said, thinking about projects right at the very start and how we go about them. Building in social value doesn't need to cost more. It just requires more thought, more planning, more recognition of this as being a fundamental part of what makes projects successful. So that could be about embedding social value and social outcomes into those decision-making processes through the sorts of frameworks that we know industry is looking for, looking at those results, through ways to measure the impact that we're creating, and also thinking about, organisational performance indicators and how they could link to social value, as well as some of the work that government is doing around procurement and how it tenders projects. So I think beyond that, if the brightest minds want to work for your organisation because they share your values, if communities trust you to deliver projects well, because they can see that the way you're operating is transparent and they understand that you are about building in meaningful social value in partnership with them, then social value becomes much more about how your organisation operates day to day, how you do business, and how your brand is perceived and respected in the market.
Great. Thanks, Lucy. Some thought starters there. That's some really great suggestions. Off the back of that, you talk about bringing the stakeholders along in that decision-making process. This is a question for Jackie, who I think they are doing that quite well at the moment, particularly around target setting. So at Lendlease, you have an ambitious target to create $250 million of social value by 2025. I love that target. How is Lendlease measuring social value? This is quite a few parts to this question, so I'm happy to come back at any time. So how are you measuring social value? What are some of the challenges that you've been coming up against meeting this target? And then how do you think we can balance people versus purpose and profit? So let's start with the first one. How is Lendlease measure? Tell us a little bit about your targets, your ambitious targets.
Yeah, so we're really proud to have the target set within the industry. So I think it's quite industry leading. We're measuring the social value we create through activities that are above and beyond any business requirement. So over and above any contractual obligations that we might have at project level. To do this, we've partnered with various not-for-profit organisations around the world to help support a variety of initiatives and causes that are aligned to our sustainability framework. So our sustainability framework gives equal measure to our environmental focus and our social focus. For our social focus, we look at economic prosperity, we look at community inclusion and wellbeing. So to measure our value, we work with external consultants. So we work with social impacts and also Think Impact. And these are accredited in social return on investment training to measure and value our work each year and support our target. So this is done through applying the principles of social return on investment to get a greater understanding of the value we create instead of just the money that we put towards these efforts. And so to date, we've created 186 million of social value with still 2 years left to achieve our target. So, you know, it is challenging, but we're really proud of where we're tracking with that. So I suppose when it does come to the challenges, I would say that the measurement process itself, so the verification and the validation of data and the proxies associated with that, can be quite arduous and time consuming. So you really do need people dedicated to seeing the process through. And as a global organisation, social value is valued in the country and the currency context in which it operates and occurs. So this is also challenging when trying to produce a full validation across multiple geographies and outcomes. So there's, I think what this also says is that you do need people to be able to deliver on social impact as well, rather than relying on just an organisational target. You need people to help to drive it as well.
Absolutely. And how about the balancing the people versus the profits and the purpose of the organisation? Have you got any tips, or how have you treated that, or how has that been received in your organisation?
Yeah, and I think sort of, as I mentioned in the very first question, is that it is aligned with our purpose and our values. So it's grounded in something, and also the fact that our sustainability framework helps us guide that. It's a one-page document. It helps us guide everything that we do, and I think also having some targets set, particularly in that RAP space, helps us to deliver. But also we're seeing more and more client expectations, investor expectations, tenant expectations, as well as government policy. So if we don't start addressing this, you'll just get left behind as well. Apart from it being the right thing to do, we're just seeing more and more out in the marketplace that there is a real focus and need to address numerous elements of social value. Yeah.
And Jackie, you talk about the over and above. So you're already reporting on your policy targets and things like that. So this 250 million of social value, is that inclusive of your current incentives that have been set by the state, for example, plus what you're doing over and above, or is that all in your?
No, so that's all over and above. And so we still do deliver our social value at a project and asset level within our regions. It's just not captured in that 250 million. We are also producing a social value report in Australia here that is due to be released in early 2024. And I'm hoping that in the chat there'll be a link to a QR code that people can register and get a copy of that report as well. Right. So again, at our project level, we focus on skilling and employment and procurement. We look at community inclusion and that engagement piece with the community, as well as wellbeing initiatives. So they're sort of the focus areas that we deliver, but we also take a very place-based approach rather than one size fits all. So when we start to talk at project and asset level, it is very much about the context of the community in which we're working.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a critical part, isn't it? It is absolutely not a one size fits all. And certainly through our previous work in producing that insights paper, that was a very strong theme that came out of that place-based approach is absolutely the way projects and organisations want to go, but also more importantly, that's what the communities are seeking out as well.
Yeah.
So that's great. So I think it's very clear we need to start this process early. Lucy, a question for you around business case, right? The business case for social value. You work with several clients identifying ways to incorporate social value and outcomes in projects and their organisations. But what is it that's getting the business case for social value over the line that you're seeing?
Thanks, Anna. I think business cases commonly utilise the Treasury guidelines and that cost-benefit analysis approach, which is robust. It means that you can look at the expected costs and the likely benefits of projects and also weigh up alternative options and do that comparison. CBA commonly incorporates monetised values for a range of indicative benefits, and they're often things like, we've heard about the importance of jobs, and that is absolutely an important part of what social value can contribute. But I guess thinking beyond some of those things that are more easy to quantify, other elements of social value like health and wellbeing outcomes can be more complex to think about how we include those, but ultimately they are really important, and important if we're going to think about a fuller picture of what a business case can deliver, what the benefits really are, and that, you know, what is the real world experience and outcome attached to a particular project. So thinking about how we, you know, if we're not considering that full range of social outcomes that are relevant to a project or a policy and ascribing a value to them, it's possible that they get missed. So imagine a business case considering the value of a piece of incredible social infrastructure like the Sydney Opera House, but not factoring in what it means for people in terms of public access, equity, inclusion, thinking about engaging audiences, educative benefits, health and wellbeing, you know. So there's a whole range of, and I think perhaps we saw some of what it's like to live in a world without those things during COVID. So factoring in social value can really help a business case to stack up as well. So it's thinking about how we actually measure those things that perhaps don't always get measured, aren't easy to measure. And we're certainly seeing more and more support for identifying social value of projects, both in quantitative terms, but also qualitatively. And we know that it's really important not to leave things aside because that their measurement, that they're being ascribed some value, that's quantitative, but, others that require more qualitative description as well. And we're seeing case studies from the UK and other parts of the world that have shown how identifying and measuring social value right at the start of that business case process means that you can then embed social value at each stage of the project. So it's not, not just thinking about it once and setting and forgetting, or not thinking about it too late in the piece. But you can then create additional social value opportunities, incorporate them throughout the project life cycle, and open up opportunities to share the benefit of a project. And I know that many people on the call will probably already be doing work in that benefit sharing space. It could be thinking about things like shared financing or in-kind contributions from people who are different parties who are benefiting. So it's not just about the fear or the risk of missing out on thinking about social value, but it's also thinking about the many opportunities that can arise by building it in from the start.
Great. So embedding social value early, that's a key theme that I'm hearing repeatedly coming through. Okay, there's lots of questions in the chat, as well as questions that we received earlier around that approach to measurement now. So I might just shift our focus onto that. And Ainsley, I might throw this question to you because you work across a vast number of organisations, both public and private. And after working closely with these organisations to implement a standard measurement tool, how do we ensure that tool is aligned to government policy and regulations? And can you talk through some of your advanced metrics for sustainability that incorporates social value as additional points, and why it may have chosen to do it that way? So Ainsley, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. I think one of the important things to mention, and Jacqueline mentioned it earlier, is looking beyond compliance. The IS rating scheme, which the ISC administers, is there to drive best practice, and that means measuring and ensuring performance outcomes that are beyond compliance. Now, the key thing around alignment, which is what you called out, is that not everything that counts can be measured, and not everything that matters can be monetized. So alignment is about measuring what matters, not necessarily always monetizing it. And there are some really useful global frameworks which have come about so that we can start looking at economic benefit. Where we get to from a policy perspective, because we are going beyond regulation, is that both the public sector and the private sector need to lead at the same time. And there is a range of ESG maturity across all levels of government and all jurisdictions. Many are recognizing the value of being an informed investor, and they're doing that in very different ways. But because there are a whole variety of different approaches at the moment, it opens the door for the private sector to do the right thing and to bridge the gap if there is a bit of a vacuum. Now, the ICE rating scheme has got 4 themes. We call that the quadruple bottom line. There's governance, there's economic, environment, and social. Now, social includes aspects such as stakeholder engagement, legacy, and workforce. But the nature of the scheme and the nature of those themes is that they are actually highly integrated. None of those can be viewed in isolation. So they're really clear linkages with credits in the governance theme, like leadership and sustainable procurement and resilience. But equally, there are linkages to economic outcomes like benefits realization when you've defined what social value is at the earliest possible time with the stakeholders that matter the most. And the value of the rating scheme is that it provides a framework for system-based thinking in identifying how social value can be embedded from planning with continuity across an asset's life cycle. So rather than just hoping for the best further down the track as a compliance checkbox and something that gets allocated through a risk-based process in procurement, I think it's a more effective way of bringing the supply chain and beneficiaries along. Now, again, as an example, I wanted to share how the rating scheme is awarding a better governance approach for a program of works known as Eastlink in Western Australia. So in this case, it was a collaborative team who established a process that enabled the development of sustainability initiatives that could be handed over to delivery contractors for funded sections, while also setting up a framework for sustainability outcomes in those packages which are yet to receive funding. The project was divided into 3 packages, each covering a very different geographic area, and through our materiality assessment, highlighted that there were different priorities for each package to guide local opportunities, but as a program, there were 3 that were really critical: resource efficiency, sustainable procurement, and stakeholder engagement. And that was consistent across the whole alignment. So the decision-making framework that was put in place supported the development of options based on this robust understanding of both the environmental and the social context. And then based on that, a 6-step process was followed, which incorporated stakeholder input and considered all of the uncertainties that are present at that early stage of a project when you may not know exactly how things are going to play out. This approach was also used for the way in which the project team worked with Indigenous communities. It connected Whadjuk, Ballardong, and Yuid country with the Noongar Nation. The framework outlined how Main Roads WA's commitment to the Aboriginal community was going to ensure that there was engagement in a really authentic and meaningful way. And it provided a roadmap of timely and meaningful participation in how they collaborated to deliver positive outcomes over the whole life cycle of that particular project. The framework addressed 5 pillars. There was Noongar heritage, there was connecting with culture, there was recognition of that culture, and there was employment and business participation. Now, that set out principles and actions which needed to be undertaken at different stages of the project to maximize those opportunities. And I think what was really valuable in this instance is that it provided the opportunity to be grounded in genuine partnership with Indigenous communities strong accountability for the outcomes that were agreed, and then a desire to leave a genuine legacy in how in which our First Nations in that particular region were going to be empowered long after EastLink WA was completed and extend into the future.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ainsley. And where is that project up to at the moment?
Well, they're still progressing. We're into the design stage now, and those outcomes are still being delivered based on that roadmap that was
great.
Was developed in
early.
partnership.
Yeah, that's a great example of starting embedding that early. Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So before I throw to our questions, we've got a couple more minutes. So where to from here, I guess? And this is, I guess, a question for all of you on the panel today. What are some of the next steps that you think are really important for embedding, growing and tracking social value in our infrastructure sector? I'm going to start with Jackie on that one. What do you think the next steps need to be, Jackie, in order to embed that correctly?
So I think for those that may be still early on in the journey, it's understanding your priority areas, your focus areas, like what is it that you want to really focus on. So for Lend-Lease, as I mentioned, it's economic prosperity, it's community inclusion and wellbeing. We know in that sort of social space, you can open a gamut of possibilities and end up in a rabbit hole. So I think identifying what it is that you want to focus on and what you want to deliver on. And I do think having targets and organisational targets, I'm not saying that a 250 million target, but employment targets, procurement targets, and they don't have to be big. I think start small because then there is a greater probability of things, like again, you can measure, but things actually being delivered. If you don't set those targets, then generally projects or organisations won't end up delivering. And I think also there's an education piece in this. So you like, rather than just sort of setting a target, it's like bringing everyone on the journey. So from a Lend-Lease point of view, it's working with our project teams, from our designers, our development managers, our construction managers, but also our supply chain, so our subcontractors, because ultimately we rely on them to be able to deliver on some of our targets as well, so that sort of second tier down. So I think there's an education piece, and also acknowledge that you can't do it on your own. So, also what partnerships do you need to form to be able to support the delivery of these outcomes? And use those, whether they're intermediaries, peak bodies, working with sort of government service providers as well. So, look at that sort of partnerships and who you can actually work with as well.
Fantastic. Great. All right. Lucy, question for you. What excites you about this space and where we're heading in Australia on social value?
Thanks, Anna. Look, I think opportunities for to realise that meaningful social change. So that's why this, I guess, at the heart of what it's all about, such as through some of the things we're seeing in New South Wales, women's safety audits coming to the fore. We're seeing more opportunities to get involved in work like gender impact assessments in Victoria that really do shift the dial on social change. And we've heard from, I think, not just Ainsley, but we've heard today about the importance of building in social value that really responds to the priorities that First Nations community members have in that, that are very place and people specific. And I think we're starting to see that work that is Aboriginal led and initiatives that are really having some real benefit for those communities. So I think that the other thing is initiatives that really respond to their context well. So if there is an issue with, women not having enough opportunities in a particular area, we heard from Ainsley earlier about one of the key groups in that employment scheme was for women and also people over 45. So really initiatives that successfully connect with the people who need them most. And I guess where there is real thought given to, instead of having targets that are, look impressive, actually having targets that are achievable, and recognising where support and resourcing and investment may be required to enable people to actually take advantage of, and get involved in procurement processes. So it could be an area where there aren't many people that are going to, get involved, or there aren't enough people who can support your construction project. So it's really building that capacity so that you can help people to take advantage of the opportunities that are going to be there. I think that's where needs assessments come in, and partnerships come in, to understand what are the needs capacities of those communities you're operating in. And then we're seeing organisations create impact where they're responding to a really prevalent issue. And several people have said today, keep it simple. I think that sometimes it can be overwhelming. It can be tempting to think, oh gosh, we've got to cover this and that and the other. But we've seen some developer clients particularly focused on neurodiversity in their spaces that they're developing, or we've seen government agencies who have a particular focus when they're thinking about places and spaces and infrastructure on building in safety for women and girls. So things that are tangible and offer real impact is what excites me here.
Yeah, great. Great examples. Thanks, Lucy. Ainsley, how about yourself? What do you think are those sort of next steps for embedding and tracking social value in the infrastructure environment?
Well, I would absolutely echo everything that Jacqueline and Lucy have said. From my perspective, what excites me is leadership. We do have partners in our member base like WSP and Lend-Lease and those other case studies that I shared with you, where we've got change agents championing shared responsibility through our transition to a net zero future that is also resilient and inclusive. And I think that if we look across Australia and New Zealand, there are pockets of excellence. There are leaders that are showing genuine commitment to deliver for all beneficiaries of infrastructure right from the outset. And those might be the end users in the future, but it could also be respectfully partnering with First Nations people and the communities and for nature and the environment that's directly impacted today. So from my perspective, my call to action would be to reflect and echo recommendation 3 and 5. The first, because it can be daunting when you first get started, start small, like Jacqueline said, make some progress, set some targets, but then share so that others can learn from your journey and you can listen to some of the pitfalls that might be coming your way, but more importantly, just get started. Recommendation 5 is really about the fact that every individual has a part to play, and my call to action there is really quite strong. No matter where you are within your organization, you can lead, no matter your role and rank. And I think that making that decision is a really powerful first step for any individual on the call today.
Excellent. Great. That's a lovely way to end that Q&A piece there. I'm going to leave everyone reflect on that piece there, Ainsley. Thank you. Now I'm very conscious of the time. I'm going to throw to some of the questions that we've received. So some of these questions were lodged prior to today's session with the registrations, and then I'm going to take us through some of the questions and pull out as many as I can very quickly. This one is, I'm going to throw this one to Jackie. This one is from John Holland Group, and it says, Jackie, oh, it doesn't say Jackie, but I'm just putting that in there. Jackie, when do you think we will start to see measuring social impact as BAU in our contracts and in our ways of working?
I think we're starting that now, and I do think that there are probably different states that are leading in that space. I think the Victorian government has the social procurement framework, which is really sort of a leading policy, and I know that other states within Australia are referencing that to form their own. And with that, yeah, there's targets that are set, and I'm excited by the fact, one, we're having these conversations. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we were never having this conversation, and I liken sort of that social stuff, the social value conversation, to what environmental sustainability was a while ago, and I think that we've always been able to measure the green star components of a building and a built form, but let's also measure, how many jobs were created, how many apprentices, what was the spend from social enterprises, and that. So I think that we're starting that journey now, and I think some states are probably a little bit more progressive than others. But I think also we've got to be thinking about it more than just compliance. It's more than a target. It's more than a tick in a box. And it comes back to what Ainsley was saying. It's telling the story, celebrating successes, but also acknowledging where there was failures as well. And I think also when we start to sort of hit targets and talk about targets and responding to client expectations, be realistic. Don't try and think that if you double a target that you'll win the job. You'll probably fail. You'll fail, you won't deliver it because the market's not mature enough in some cases to be able to meet those targets. So I think that, yeah, we're certainly, if I think of my role 5 years ago, we're in a really strong place in terms of like talking about measuring, that is, and delivering on social impact and social outcomes.
Great. Some of your commentary there actually bodes well into another question that we had received. And this one, and I'd love to hear your experiences of, if you have experienced this and what you might have done to overcome that. But we obviously talk about procuring goods and services. This is a question from across the Tasman, or across Bass Strait, from Marinus Link. So we talk a lot about procuring goods from social enterprises, but in some smaller states like Tasmania, for example, there are very few that exist. Have you seen, or have you been able to support social enterprises getting off the ground, or have you seen any great initiatives that might help towards building that pool of people that are available for this type of work?
So yeah, we've worked closely with social enterprises and First Nations businesses across many of our projects across Australia. Again, in each state, there is different sort of capacity and capability in that space. Again, Victoria is quite fortunate in terms of the number of social enterprises that it has, as well as, and First Nations businesses are growing in Victoria. I think you also working with peak bodies like social traders, social ventures, Supply Nation, Kinaway Chamber of Commerce, those sorts of peak bodies to help identify, because I think often we go for low-hanging fruit like catering, which is great, but again, it's not going to change the dial. But also it's working with these social enterprises to understand their capacity and their capability. So you can't just trade on goodwill. You've got to be able to deliver, and particularly if you're working in that sort of construction or infrastructure space, you've got to be able to deliver and meet sort of contractual obligations. But also for us as an organisation, it's about unpacking certain packages. So rather than saying, giving a social enterprise, a $20 million package, which they wouldn't be able to deliver on in most cases, how do we break that down? How do we start to sort of go pull out some discrete pieces of work that a social enterprise could deliver? You start to build their capacity and capability. And so it's also working with them to achieve it, so that it's not just pure procurement and pure transactional component.
Yes.
It's about partnerships and collaboration to build the capacity of that sector. And again, with Tasmania, it maybe is starting small and maybe is with catering organisations, but it's looking at those organisations and where they can fit into your stream and your supply chain.
Yeah, great. And you make a really important point there. It is not just about you having to do it on your own. It is about partnerships and seeking those out. Ainsley, I think you had something to add to that dialogue as well.
Really wanted to build on that, because one of the most important things is recognizing the economic dynamics. And in some instances, the market just needs the signal that there is an appetite to engage with social enterprises. Perhaps in some regions there hasn't been huge demand, and as a result of that, those enterprises haven't been established because there hasn't been a very clear, strong signal that their services are needed. But like Jacqueline said, it is then really important that we've got forward procurement to build capability that goes along with that. And I think there's some very helpful regional-based examples that we've seen used, and I'll give Inland Rail as an example there, where they actually, particularly for small and medium-sized enterprises, put together programs where those organisations could become more familiar with very formal government tender processes, how they responded to the sometimes very complicated tender schedules that were necessary, and had a whole suite of learning and training opportunities that the local community and regional business could access so that they could be as competitive for the most appropriate portions of work.
Great. And that's also capacity building too, as we talked about before as well. That's a fantastic example. Thank you. I've got another question. I'm going to throw this one at Lucy. So obviously, renewable energy is a big focus of across Australia at the moment. And so bigger picture-wise, and that also leads from what Ainsley said too, you know, we've got communities who are about to undergo some enormous change, who may not have had change in those regions for a very long time. So how do we create social value for communities, particularly those ones in the path of renewable energy zones, for example, and make it that it is meaningful and good, just and better beyond education, and it is about giving them those wider benefits and building that capacity. So how do you think we need to, is there anything different we need to do in that res space, taking all of what we've heard today into account?
Look, I think it's an interesting one. And I also think that the value of really good, robust information can't be understated. So I think in some instances, information is actually a really important part of the picture, and it's not always easy for members of the community, including those who live in or near the new, the renewable energy zones, to access really good, solid information about what the energy transition and what the development of transmission lines means for them, in order that they can fully participate in the consultation processes that are already underway, have been for several years, and will continue to happen over the course of the next few decades. So we are seeing that some proponents are using leading practice engagement to connect with communities and stakeholders, while on other projects engagement can be really late and done in a way that doesn't necessarily enable people to have a clear understanding of where they can influence design or decision making, or in a way that doesn't give them that really critical information to support informed comment. And people are understandably interested in things like the cost of the infrastructure, but also the cost as it impacts them day to day of energy. So I think opportunities to share in the benefits of the transition are really critical to its success, and doing that in a way that does build in social value. Late last month, we heard Penny Sharp talk about the Community and Employment Benefit Fund that will be used to deliver over $100 million of community and employment opportunities to communities in the Central West Orana res over the next few years. And then over the course of the next several decades, there will be hundreds of millions of dollars that become available for communities who are hosting that infrastructure, with a view to coming back to one of the themes from the ISC rating tool that Ainsley referred to earlier, which is that leaving a legacy. So that could be about working closely with communities and local stakeholders to identify relevant initiatives like housing, infrastructure improvements and upgrades, energy efficiency initiatives, that initiatives for First Nations communities or other community members, and of course, importantly, jobs, training, etc., that really builds in opportunities into the communities where this transition is happening.
Yeah, and collaboration too is going to be really important in those zones. Also, when you've got multiple developers in that space as well. I'm going to just try and pull out a couple of questions because we are nearing the end of our session today, how time flies. There's a question in the chat from Brett around if the panel thinks there is benefit for enacting a social value act as they've done in the UK. What are people's thoughts around enshrining this in legislation, and do you think that is a useful way of doing things? Jackie, what do you think?
I think whether it's legislation or government policy, I think that there needs to be something there. I do think the UK is very much leading in this space. I know they have I think it's called their Section 106s on their projects, and it's very much, again, place-based. Every local government has that, and they have their priority areas. I think that because my fear is if there's a change of government with policy, if it's policy, like in Victoria, does the social procurement framework change? But if it's legislated, then maybe yes, there is a greater probability of it being a constant. So I think without those sorts of drivers, there's not always a desire from industry to deliver on those things. So I think it starts to change the dial.
Agree. I think that's a very strong theme that we've been hearing. I'm going to pull out another question for another one of our panelists. There's a couple in there around First Nation stakeholders. I'm going to pass on those ones, so apologies. They were ones I think Shari would have been very vocal in those ones, but I don't know that we've got the right expertise on the panel left for those ones. But let's talk about, let me see. So we've talked about demonstrating the return on investment and the methods that you can use in that space, and we will share. So I think someone else has asked for some links and things like that. We will share all of that post today, and we'll also be sharing a small little plug here for a short survey. So do let us know what you think of today's session and if we've captured and met your objectives of why you've joined today. So many questions. I can't pick one. Andrew White asks, why isn't there a set framework to measure social value? Does anyone want to have a go at answering that one? I'd like to know the answer to that one also.
I think it's about complexity, isn't it?
Yes.
And perhaps, maturity, we've used that word a few times, but Jacqueline talked about where we were, I don't know, a couple of decades ago with the environment, and we didn't have very robust measures in place then, but we certainly moving in the right direction there now. So, yeah, I think we will, and also we talked about place-based and how important it is to respond to place, how with global businesses you're weighing up very different contexts in different parts of the world, but also what's right for one community, which could be right next to another community, might be quite different as well. So yeah, I think complexity, but as Ainsley said, got to start somewhere, and that's really important.
Indeed. Fantastic. Thanks, Lucy. And that's a great little roundup there, I think, of some of the rationale behind our conversation today. Okay, we have got 1 minute left. So I'm going to do a quick one last poll with everybody, if I could, just to help us see where we've landed today. So the second poll for today, I'd like to ask you, why would your organisation prioritise social value? Is it for reputation purposes, recruitment or brand, I think Lucy referred to before, or is it for your shareholders or to develop that social license to operate, right thing to do, or better outcomes for the community? So if we've got anybody left online, we might just start having a look at those and see if there are some trends that we can find. I think while we're going through that, I'll just do a quick little wrap up because it is very, very clear to me and hopefully to everybody today that delivering social value is an absolute must for everybody. And it does require a considered approach, appropriate investment and time and resources, as well as frameworks. I think the framework is the big thing that's come out of today's discussion that supports that coordination and collaboration across projects so that we can create that meaningful impact. So looking at our poll, better outcomes for community. I love that. That's the clear front runner. 75%, almost 3/4 of our attendees today are outcomes focused on the community, which is fantastic. Not surprised given the level of people that we have on the call today, but we have gone over time. I'm really sorry, everyone. I did try and promise to finish you by 1 o'clock. I'd really like to say thank you to our panelists for today. It's been a great discussion. It's been great to hear from all of you. Thank you for bringing your insights to the panel for today. And to everybody online, thank you also for joining us. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of your questions. We'll try and put some more information around some of the questions that we've got in our email that you will receive with links to the report and to some other resources as well. So please keep an eye out on your inbox for that, which will arrive in the next day or two. So thank you very much for joining this afternoon, everybody. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to sharing more information and insights and seeing this progress going forward. So thank you very much once again, and have a fabulous afternoon.
Thank you too. Bye now.
Thank you.